Hey friends, it's me, Em again, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things sinister. If you are interested in true crime or if you like all things horror related, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. That way you can join me for some morbid conversation. Now, this case will have us leaving the US and traveling to New Zealand, and that is because we are going to be talking about the horrific death of wife and mother Christine Lundy and her 7-year-old daughter Amber Lundy. I'm going to be honest with you guys. My husband and I have talked extensively about this case the past couple days, and something in my gut just doesn't sit right. This is the first case that we have gone over on this channel where I genuinely do not believe the right person is behind bars. I'm going to present to you the facts. I'm going to tell you everything that I know. And at the end, I'm going to tell you my opinion. But before we get to my opinion, I'm going to try to present this case as unbiased as I possibly can because I am interested to see if your opinion matches up with mine. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say. So, with that being said, let's get to the details of the case. Christine Lundy had been married to Mark Lundy for 18 years, and Amber was their only child together. The couple not only owned a kitchen sink and hardware business together, but Mark had also purchased a vineyard in 2000. It was because of his kitchen business that he was out of town on the 29th of August in the year of 2000. He left the family home in Palmerston, North New Zealand, and traveled to Wellington and checked into his hotel around 5 that evening. Now, phone records would show that Mark would end up calling and speaking with his family not long after checking into the hotel. Sometime later that evening, around 8:30, phone records would also show that he would call his business partner and speak with his business partner in regards to the vineyard, not the kitchen sink, the vineyard business partner. Sometime later that night, a little bit before midnight, phone records would again show that Mark would end up calling an escort service and ordering company for the night. These are things that we know. These are phone records that we have, and those phone records show that the calls were made and that the calls were made from the area that he was staying in, which was about 2 hours away from his home. Back at the Lundy home, Amber and Christine would end up having McDonald's for dinner around 6 o'clock that evening. We know this to be true because one testimony given by Mark confirmed this because remember, he had spoken with his family not long after checking into the motel, and Amber had told him that she and her mother were having McDonald's for dinner. Two, they also found a receipt for McDonald's, again confirming the timeline. Sometime before 7 o'clock, a friend of Christine's would call the family home and speak with Christine for a few minutes. The last known time that we have a digital footprint of is that the family computer shut down around 11 o'clock that night. It would be the next day that Christine's brother, James Weggery, would go over to her home. And he would go over to her home concerned because Christine wasn't answering anybody's phone calls. When he got to the home, he saw her car was there, but nobody was answering the door when he knocked. Again, this had him concerned, and so he let himself into the home. When he let himself into the home, he was greeted by an absolutely horrible sight. Amber and Christine had both been murdered, and not only had they been murdered, they had been bludgeoned to death in a very violent and gory manner. When police would arrive, they would be unable to locate the weapon, but they would note that it looked as though a hatchet or a tomahawk was used. Autopsy would show that the murders took place no later than 7:15 that night. In February of the following year, Mark would actually end up being arrested for the murder of his wife and his daughter. Despite the fact that phone records had placed him in Wellington that day, police had thought that between these phone records, he actually traveled back home to murder his family and then traveled back to Wellington to continue on creating an alibi. So, as far as motivation goes and why they suspected Mark would have motivation to do this, is the family had just recently spoken with their insurance agent. And at the recommendation of their insurance agent, they had increased their life insurance. And specifically, in regards to this case, Christine's life insurance had gone from $200,000 up to $500,000 in the event of her death. Now, this is important to note because that vineyard that we had talked about Mark purchasing at the start of the story, he hadn't actually completed the purchase yet. He was still around $2 million on the hook for this vineyard. So it did look as though Mark was hurting for money, which would be a good motivation here. However, in my opinion, and I know I said I wouldn't be going into a lot of my opinion, but this kind of seems a little weak because if Mark was really after money, it would have benefited him to wait a little bit longer. And the reason why that is because despite the fact that they had spoken with the insurance agent and had agreed to increase the life insurance, that had not actually gone through yet. The paperwork, the process, it was not completed. So if Christine were to die like she did, he would not get the new higher amount. He would get the old lower amount of $200,000. So, another piece of evidence that was entered by the prosecution is despite the fact that they were unable to find any murder weapon, they did find traces of paint in Amber and in Christine's hair. And this paint, they said, is similar enough and matched enough to the paint that was used on tools that were in Mark's tool shed. And so, in their theory, in their eyes, the hatchet or the tomahawk that was used to kill them could have been marked with this same kind of paint that was used on other tools in Mark's tool shed. And so they kind of used that paint as a linking for a potential weapon to be linked to the tool shed where Mark kept his tools. However, the nail in Mark's coffin would be the shirt that they found in the back of his car. It was a polo shirt, and forensics found a trace amount of Christine's DNA that was identified to be either spinal fluid or brain matter. They argued that this would have only been on his shirt if he was there at the time of the murder. It was this piece of evidence that ended up getting Mark arrested for the crime in the first place. Now, Mark's defense team would, one, bring up the phone records showing that he was in Wellington, 2 hours away from where his family home was. And they argued that it was impossible for him to make the drive back to the home, kill his family, clean up, show that the house kind of looked like it was burglarized. There was a jewelry box that was missing and never found, and then drive back to Wellington in order to continue on with his alibi. The defense would also present the fact that they had forensics in, and forensics checked his vehicle. They checked his clothes. They checked the glasses. They checked under his fingernails. They checked his hands. They checked the zipper on his pants. They checked anywhere where trace amount of evidence could be found. You know, like the little screws inside your glasses where a microscopic piece of DNA could theoretically stay. Because keep in mind, like I said, this was very gory and very graphic. I don't want to go into too horrible details, but imagine a crime scene that involves the swinging of an axe repeatedly onto a victim's head. Think of all the backsplash and the blowback that you're going to get from that. Microscopic pieces of evidence would be found somewhere. And they didn't find anything. Not on his hands, not on his glasses, not on his clothes, not on his zipper, not in his car. Nowhere. The only evidence that they found was on this polo shirt. And they argued that this could have been cross-contamination. This was the only place that DNA was, and it was possible that it could have either been planted there by police or accidentally transferred there just due to poor collection of evidence. Trial would span over the course of about 7 weeks, and at the end of the 7 weeks, the jury would end up taking about 6.5 hours to discuss the case before they would come to a verdict. And to my surprise, they actually came to the verdict of guilty, and Mark was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 17 years. Now, the following month, Mark did try to appeal his verdict and his sentencing. And he did this especially because another witness came forward, and another witness said that they had seen him reading his book in Wellington during around the time that the murders would have taken place. Despite this, his appeal was denied. And not only was it denied, now they increased his non-parole period from 17 years up to 20 years. So he is still sentenced to life in prison, and this time he has a non-parole period of 20 years. So I think the thing that absolutely blows my mind the most about this case is the drive to and from his family home. And the reason why it blows my mind is because in order to make this timeline work, at minimum, Mark would have had to have averaged 95 miles an hour to be able to travel from where he was staying at the hotel back to his family home, commit the murder, and clean himself up enough that there's no evidence on him or in his car besides that shirt, and travel back to his hotel, again, averaging 95 miles an hour. And he supposedly did this without getting pulled over by the police, without having any other drivers on the road call in like a non-emergency line and say, hey, there is a crazy man driving 100 miles an hour down the road, or without hitting any speed cameras or anything. Not only that, not only would he have to want to travel 95 miles an hour, but he would have to be physically able to do so. And what I mean by that, in order to make this timeline work, he would have to be traveling right during like rush hour time period between like 5 and 7, because they were murdered around 7 o'clock. And remember, his phone records had him in Wellington checking into the hotel at 5. So he would have had to fly back home, murder them, and then fly back during rush hour traffic. So even if he wanted to go 95 miles an hour, would traffic on the road allow him to do so? Would there be the ability to get around the flow of traffic in order to be able to travel this fastly? And I'll tell you, I don't think so. Because since this trial, many people, including former police officers, including private investigators, have attempted to try just that. They have attempted to try to make the trip from his hotel to his home during the same time of day that this took place, and nobody has been able to accomplish it. Nobody has been able to accomplish it. But they just accept that it happened and that he was able to accomplish it. And that blows my mind. I will admit the DNA evidence on the shirt is a big deal. I'm not trying to disregard that. But we know that mistakes happen. And we know that not everybody in law enforcement is perfect. Do I see a potential cross-contamination or a potential, planting of evidence? Yeah, I can see that, especially since it is the only DNA evidence that they were able to get off of him and off of the vehicle. They also argued that he flubbed up on the stand. He was cross examined for 2.5 hours on the stand, and he didn't remember exactly the timeline of his morning. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't remember my timeline from yesterday between when my girls got up from breakfast to when they sat down for lunch. Because to me, yesterday was just a normal day and we just kind of go with the flow on the normal days. And I don't have every minute of my day memorized. And if he was not the one who killed his family, as far as he knew, it was a normal day. He had no reason to memorize every moment from that morning. And remember, he was not even arrested until 6 months after the murders took place. So the trial was even longer than that. Remembering exactly what happened that morning down to the minute, I can give him a bit of grace for not remembering the timeline perfectly because I don't remember timelines perfectly. You know what I mean? But that's just me. According to the New Zealand Court of Law, he is guilty of murdering his wife and his daughter. I know that New Zealand and the US are two totally different places, but in my mind, and talking to my husband, I cannot help but compare it to things like Casey Anthony. When she was found innocent, when we had so much evidence against her, and she was found innocent. But in this case, it seems like the evidence that we have against him is very, very thin. And it seems like, especially with the car drive, the things going in his direction, I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I just don't feel like there is enough proof there for me to find this man guilty of murdering his wife and his daughter. Not only that, he did get to go to their funeral because, like I said, the arrest didn't happen for 6 months after the murders, and he had to be like escorted out of the funeral. He was just so grief stricken that he had to be supported out of the funeral because of how upset he was. And I know psychopaths can like put on a show, but that and the trip, it just I'm not sold. I'm just not sold. I'm not sold. And my gut tells me an innocent man is in jail. I don't know who else would have motivation to go in and create such a violent crime scene. But like I said, it did look like the home was burglarized. A jewelry box is missing and it has never been found. So maybe it was just a burglary that just wound up in a very violent outcome. But I don't know. I just know that I am not sold that it was this man. But I'm excited to see what you guys have to say. I'm excited to see where you stand on it. Do you think that it is enough evidence to put him in prison for life without parole for 20 years? Or are you not convinced? Make sure to leave your comments down below. Make sure you've hit like and subscribe to the channel. And if this is the kind of conversation that you're interested in, make sure you turn on the post notification bell. That way you can join me the next time I sit down here for another morbid conversation. Until next time, as always, friends, take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you later. All right? Bye.